Hey there, everyone. Dr. Brad here, and we are ready to roll with day number 2. Title this one, Dysbiosis and Leaky Gut Explained, because that's the material for today. We're going to dive into, oh, there it is, good. We're going to dive into leaky gut and dysbiosis, and I'm hoping that I will be able to see if you have any comments, right? In this, the software I'm using has a little window that says comments, so, and I don't know why I wasn't seeing any of them yesterday, but I'm going to look on my other laptop over here and try to monitor for comments also. So be patient with me if you make comments, hopefully, or ask questions. My goal is that today I will actually see them live, but if we have technical difficulties again, I'll go back in like I did with yesterday's and answer the questions as they come in. And if you're watching this on the replay, anyhow, not with us live, which I totally get, a lot of you probably are, write your questions in the comments of this video and I will watch, or any of the videos, but I'll keep my eyes out and do my best to answer those questions. Check it out today. Kids Eating Broccoli podcast. That's my podcast. Powered by broccoli. All right. If you're wondering what the heck t-shirt I'm wearing, I'm not happy with the t-shirt maker that I got this from because they shrink like crazy. Anyway, so today I'm kind of wasting some time here waiting for a couple more people to get on before we dive deep into the stuff. But I did want to say, like I said, we're going to be talking about dysbiosis, which is just a fancy word for meaning that the gut microbiome, the ecosystem of our gut, in terms of bacteria, funguses, all that stuff. Dysbiosis means it's out of its natural balance, and so that's what dysbiosis, if you've been wondering. And leaky gut is sort of part of that, the result of that, the cause of it, all wrapped up into one. So this is kind of like this is where things get fun, Yesterday we had to kind of go through the basics so that we're all on the same page, so that I made sure that we all kind of understand where we're coming from or where I'm coming from. And, to basically, we got to lay the foundation. So today's foundation also, but today is going to dive deeper foundationally into the gut microbiome. We're going to talk about like we talked about yesterday, microbiome, the microbiota, the metabolome. And so just as a review, microbiome is the word for the entire ecosystem of the organisms in our whole body. But we're talking about our gut microbiome, the ecosystem of all the organisms in our gut. So that includes bacteria, that includes fungus, that includes viruses and parasites, which we all have a whole lot of those things. Hi, Tracy. I see a comment over there, but it's not popping up here. Weird. Alrighty. Well, anyway, I'll keep my eye over there. So, and be patient with me, I guess, if I don't see your comment or question right away. So anyway, microbiome. Okay, so microbiome, bacteria, funguses, viruses, parasites. Microbiota is what each of those are. So like members of the microbiome is the whole ecosystem. The individual members are microbiota. And the metabolome is the environment that is created by the metabolic processes of those microbiota in the microbiome. And then also, as a reminder and review, when we're talking about our microbiome, the number of cells, because each of the things in there is an individual, a lot of the things are single cell organisms, or, some have multiple cells. But we have 10 times as many bacterial, fungal, parasitic cells in our digestive system as we have in the entire human body. And that's just the number of cells. But if we really look at what is meaningful in biology, in life, we're talking about the information, so the genetic information. And when we're looking at genetic information, we're less than 1% human genetic information. When we look at the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens and hundreds of millions of varieties of genetic information that are housed in those bacteria, those funguses, and the viruses in this case, and parasites. And in fact, we have at least in terms of just variety. We have are estimated anywhere from 10 to 40,000 different variety of bacteria. We'll get into that a little bit here in a minute. But that number has skyrocketed. It used to be thought that we maybe had 500 or 600. Then 1,000 was kind of the accepted standard for a while, and now we're starting to understand that maybe we have quite a bit more, as many as 40,000. And the reason why one of the reasons why we're just sort of starting to learn a lot of this stuff about the microbiome is because, well, two reasons, really, two big reasons. One is nobody was looking. Not nobody, but a lot of people weren't looking. We didn't have any kind of sense or understanding in sort of the mainstream scientific view, at least, of the importance of understanding the gut microbiome. But the other big reason is that most of the microbiota are what's called anaerobic. So that means they live in a non-oxygen environment, which is what our gut is. They're fluid, they're mucus, there's not free-floating oxygen in there. So as soon as it comes out of the body, they die. And so we can't look at what they are very well once they're dead. So only when we recently, in modern technology, have gene sequencing and so forth, are we able to even start to scratch the surface of what's really in there. And that's why the numbers have gone from 500 or 600 to 1,000, now to 10, even 40,000 bacteria. There's over 100,000 species of fungus. And that's just, we don't even understand how the fungus work yet. And then there are so many, and there's thousands of parasites, and then there's so many viruses that we can't even count them, in part genetically, but part because they change so fast. It's kind of like you can't pin them all down and count them. And so that's why we're so vastly outnumbered in terms of our human genetic information. I've heard some people say, we're only alive as a species at the permission, the generous, benevolent permission of our microbiome. And when you look at how we're less than 1% human, it sort of seems like that maybe makes sense. All right, let's see here. I'm going to do a screen share again like yesterday to dive into our material. So we want to go to secondary display. Almost there. All right, Gut Health 101 Day 2. We're going to dive into leaky gut and dysbiosis. So when we're talking about our gut flora, we're just covering a lot of this. There's a lot of information, misinformation out there, all kinds of stuff. And so, I guess that doesn't matter. So some of this stuff, I just like these word diagrams, right? It gets us warmed up, gets us on the page, gut flora, microflora, stomach, bacteria, organisms, fermented, all that kind of good stuff. Okay, we can stop staring at that now. All right, so the microbiome, let's take a closer look. So in our microbiome, and we like I was just saying, we have these tons of bacteria, and then even, at least twice, if not 3 or 4 or 5 times as much fungus, and, an uncountable amount of viral material, and not to mention parasites also. But what we know the most about, because we've studied the most about it, is the bacteria, which is what's in probiotic supplements and fermented foods and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk mostly about that in large part because that's frankly what we know the most about. So here we go. So in the microbiome, really, we have kind of 3-ish to 4 types or varieties of microbes in there. So we have our beneficial microbes. We'll get into each of these with a little more detail in a second, but we have our beneficial microbes. We have what are called our opportunistic microbes. And then we have what are called our transient microbes and pathogenic microbes, which kind of go together. But I didn't want to just call them pathogenic because a lot of times they're just transient and they don't actually cause any problems. So I didn't want to give the wrong idea by just calling them pathogenic. But those last two go together. So beneficial microbes, you might have heard of some of these ones. This is just an example: the bifidobacteria, the lactobacteria, the propionobacteria, and others. These are the most common varieties that we'll see on supplements and you'll see like B dot some Latin word or L dot some Latin word, and that's what that's talking about. The B or the L are talking about those. So those are most common ones. So here's some of the things they do. One of the important things that the beneficial microbes do, and this is part of why they're considered beneficial microbes, is they in and of themselves help manage the population of all of the microbiota. And so that's not just the other bacteria, but the funguses and the parasites and so on and so forth by, one, out competing, taking up space, so other microbes can't take up that space. Also, many of the beneficial microbes release certain chemicals that are antibacterial or antiviral or antifungal. So they, make it so that the environment is correct. They do a lot to manage the environment, essentially, so that the correct microbiome, the proper balanced symbiosis rather than dysbiosis, is occurring. They directly assist the immune system to neutralize harmful microbes, and they do this in a number of ways. But in terms of assisting our own immune system directly, they pass information back and forth with our immune cells. About 70% of our immune system is right in our gut area, and it has a big interactivity with the microbes. So much so that the beneficial microbes will often identify antigens, so other bacteria that might make us sick or other chemicals that are toxic, heavy metals even, all that kind of stuff, and give off chemical signatures that then our immune cells that are going to go in and handle it identify that that's what's going on. They kind of like present it to the immune system so it can mobilize and mount a response and try to protect us from whatever those harmful bacteria or chemicals are. They perform vital digestive functions. So when we think about our digestive system and some of the stuff we talked about yesterday, with the stomach and the stomach acid breaking down proteins and then the enzymes that we release into the small intestine and all the stuff the large intestine does, the real truth of the matter is, or how we're understanding now that a lot of our digestion occurs, is actually by the microbes themselves. They do a large part of, especially our enzymatic activity. Some people estimate up to 90% of our enzymatic activity in our bodies done by microbes and not by our body's own enzymes and cells and stuff like that. So they do that. And then they actually literally help protect and maintain the integrity of the cells of our gut lining. So when we start talking a little bit more about leaky gut, remember this part, because leaky gut is talking about the cells of the gut lining being in an unhealthy state. So when we have the proper good population of the beneficial microbes, they do a lot to actually help protect and maintain the integrity of those actual cells that get injured and damaged in a leaky gut situation. Okay, opportunistic microbes. So this is actually the biggest group. So beneficial bacteria or beneficial microbes are in a small, there's not a ton of those ones that we know about, but the opportunistic microbes, there's actually quite a bit of these in terms of variety of species. So these are things like bacteroids, that's supposed to be streptococci, staphylococci, oh no, there's strep, I don't know, peptococci, bacilli, clostridia. So staph, you might have heard of like staph infections, streptococci, that's like the strep throat, clostridium, those kind of things. So when we hear these names, they can sort of be linked to some things we've heard about with diseases. They don't have to cause diseases. There are many varieties of each of these phylums, I think they are. But anyway, these are opportunistic. So that means that they're there. They don't do as much beneficial activity as the probiotics per se, but they're opportunistic. So they cause problems when our probiotic, our beneficial bacteria population is decreased. They start to take over more. So they do perform a variety of known functions, including more of that digestion and production of various substances needed for healthy function, including some vitamins and fatty acids that our gut cells use for energy. And many of these organisms have been implicated in diseases and symptoms. And I put an asterisk there because I wanted to remind myself about that. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of why I put an asterisk there. And then I think, like I mentioned last time, that at some point along these 7 days, I'm going to drop in at least one bonus session, if not two, where I kind of give you sort of the advanced view into what people are understanding about our health and our microbiome. It's related to this because the truth is there is some evidence pointing to the fact that perhaps it's not these microorganisms that are causing the diseases that we think they cause, that in fact they might actually be a symbiotic immune response. Kind of like, I don't know how much you know about like antibodies in our body. You know, if you get a viral infection, say the flu, and somebody, you're in the middle of having the flu and somebody drew some blood, what they would find in your bloodstream are antibodies to that flu virus. That's how your immune system fights it off. They go in, they help clear out the viruses, they help you get better. But if a person were to draw your blood and see those antibodies and they didn't understand how the immune system worked at all, you might imagine that they could potentially make the mistaken conclusion that seeing those antibodies are causing the problem, because you only see them when people are sick with the flu. So anyway, there is evidence that perhaps that's actually the case in some of these cases with the microbes. But for now, we do know that they've been implicated in disease and symptoms. We do know that letting their populations get out of control in sort of the opportunistic way is problematic. You know, we want balance. So that's the opportunistic. And then the transitional / pathogenic microbes. These are various microbes we ingest daily in our food and our drinks, even breathing the air. A lot of these, we are bait. Not only do we have all those, 10 times as many bacterial and funguses and viruses and so forth in our system and all that stuff we talked about earlier, but we're bathed in the sea of a tremendous diversity of microbes in our world. Like right now I'm in a room. If I could literally see how many microbes are in here, it would be astounding. It'd be in the hundreds of millions likely in terms of variety. Well, maybe not in the room, but if I went outside where it's a healthier environment. So in a healthy gut, these are dealt with by the gut flora and just pass right through the system. They don't set up shop and cause us problems, because kind of like where we would have problems if we ate stuff that wasn't food for us, for humans. Like if I went out and ate grass off the grass out there, I can't digest that. That would cause problems. Same way if we were to have the wrong kind of microbes set up shop in our system. So when our system's healthy, these transitional microbes just pass on through. But when your microbiome is not healthy, they can cause various diseases. And this is where we see things like food poisoning. I mean, food poisoning, like any other disease, infectious disease type of disease, just logic and reason tells us that the microbes certainly can't be the only causative factor, because how often is it that several people will eat the same meal and only one or two or some percentage of them get sick with food poisoning? Not every single one of them. Sometimes everyone, but sometimes not. And so that's based on the health or the health, we'll call it that, of their microbiome, and how well it dealt with that transitional microbe or allowed it to set up shop and start causing illness before the immune system had to kick in and so forth. So that's transitional. So those are our three main the three varieties of the microbiota in our microbiome. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit more. There's the friendly bacterias and funguses and stuff around those pink digestive cells. So we're going to talk about a little more in depth, now that we kind of gave the broad view, the types of the microbiota, and then sort of generally a little bit about what each of them does. Now we're going to dive deeper into all of the ways that our microbiome or our microbiota interact in a symbiotic way, meaning like we coexist for each other's mutual benefit. So among other things, our microbiome provides a physical barrier to invading organisms and chemical toxins. And it's kind of like, if you think about grass on a slope. So there's like a hill that's covered in nice, thick, healthy grass. The grass would be like the microbiome, and this topsoil under there, you could look at like our gut lining. So if the grass is healthy and thick and is healthy, then when somebody runs around on the hill or there's a big rain or anything like that, the topsoil is all held in place. It doesn't erode. But now if you went and sprayed something on that grass that killed it, or killed part of it, the next big rain or the next time a bunch of kids ran up and down the hill, it would start damaging the topsoil. It'd start allowing the topsoil to erode down the slope. You can look at the microbiome similarly, where they create actually a physical protective layer over covering our delicate digestive, inner lining of our digestive system, and really literally protect it from invading organisms and toxins and stuff like that. And within that, they create certain antifungal, antimicrobial, and antiviral compounds, not to just wipe them out. It's not like they're creating a massive antibiotic dosage or anything, but enough that changes to keep the populations in the right, under the right amount of control. So they're kind of like the guardians of your whole digestive system, these probiotics or these beneficial bacteria, constantly monitoring the other populations and excreting, or I don't know if excreting is the right word, but putting out special chemicals that will keep things under the right control. And like I mentioned before, it directly engages the immune system. So the ways that happens is kind of technical, and we could do a whole class on just that. But there are some remarkable things they're discovering about the interactions between our immune system and our microbiome and what's called our enteric nervous system, which is also referred to as our second brain, or the nervous system cells around our digestive system, which we'll talk in more detail about in one of the next classes. Also, the microbiome is responsible in a large way for correcting the pH, or the acidity, in the different areas. And when that gets out of balance, we run into other problems. You might have heard of like acid reflux, of course, which is a problem with the pH in your stomach. Anyway, it's actually a problem typically of having too low or too high of a pH, meaning not acidic enough. But the microbiome in the proper locations, the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, actually dictate the amount of pH that allows us to function correctly. And they do directly, aside from just how they activate the immune system, they also directly neutralize nitrates and other toxic chemicals and other carcinogenic chemicals. So, you might be getting the picture that when our microbiome is in good balance and in good health, that actually we can deal with a lot of toxicity and a lot of things without it damaging our system very much. They buffer that, But whenever, within reason, certainly as they do that, they start to, can potentially get damaged. But it's the same with illnesses too. Like we mentioned, or I mentioned flu before when we're talking about food poisoning. When you start really kind of getting the big picture of it, how the microbiome works in our immune system, and how it's continuous also with our sinus system. With our breathing through our nose and stuff. It starts to become clear that what dictates whether you get sick or not, right? If you're exposed to like somebody with the flu, and they sneeze on your face or something, what dictates whether you're going to develop the symptoms of flu or not it's not as important in a sense how much exposure you got, though that factors in. It's really, did those microbes that just got sneezed in your face, right, those flu viruses, do they have the strength to overpower your microbiome, or is your microbiome robust, diverse, and healthy enough that it just deals with it without you ever having to get sick? And it's interesting because it's like I get to deal with this a lot. In my chiropractic practice, my hands touch people all day long, and they have a variety of being healthy, being sick, all that kind of stuff. I've missed one day in my career of 14 years now for a health reason, and that was because I had food poisoning, which I guess is microbiome. But I've never missed because of flu or any of those things. And not that necessarily I've been perfect with the microbiome, but I know that some of the health habits, essentially inadvertently, when I didn't understand this as much, and now more directly, really made sure that I had a good, robust, and I'm blanking on the word, a robust and diverse ecosystem in there to help protect that. Okay, let's see what else. They literally directly suppress cancer formation. So gut cells that are starting to head in that direction, like our actual body cells, they help mediate that and mitigate that, either by telling the cells to just kill themselves, which is a normal process, or helping them heal. And when they're damaged, they allow for attack from the environmental toxins, like I mentioned. And then also when they're damaged, they let opportunistic ones take over, and then it's harder to regain the balance. Let's see, there's a question over here. Do you get flu injections? No, I do not. Vaccines are a whole big topic into themselves. So we won't go down that road too much just because it could sort of sidetrack us. But the short answer is no. As far as I know, I don't think I've ever had a flu shot. When I was a kid, I don't know if they had them yet. When I was a child, I had the childhood vaccines. I didn't know any different. I was a kid. My parents didn't know any different. I didn't even hear that there was potentially even a controversy about vaccines until I was in chiropractic school. But I will tell you this, for me personally, as soon as I heard that it was actually like a controversial thing, because before I was like, oh, you use vaccines, whatever. It's like you brush your teeth. Like, who doesn't brush their teeth because they think it's not good for you? Like, who wouldn't vaccinate? That was what I thought. And then I found out there was actually a whole lot of people that don't vaccinate because of concerns about safety and all these kind of things. And then I realized, like, oh, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. So, anyway, I don't get flu injections. I don't recommend them. There are a lot of problematic aspects about that. The CDC itself indicates they have a very low success rate, particularly with the flu shot. Typically, most years it's as low as the placebo, the one time they've done the placebo test. We also know that having, I think it's 4 or 5 successive flu shots annually increases your risk of Alzheimer's and dementia by 10 times. So I don't like that trade-off. I'd rather get the flu every year than get Alzheimer's or dementia. Anyway, back to what we're talking about here directly. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to touch on about the proper microbiome, they actually literally and directly nourish our gut cells, what are called our enterocytes. They take constituents in our food and actually convert them into short-chain fatty acids primarily, and some other compounds that are actually the food that our enterocytes or our digestive cells use to have energy to do the digestion, to absorb, to produce their different chemicals and then to absorb the nutrients into our bloodstream. So it's important that we have that. When we have, you can kind of also start to see how, you either have a healthy system that really keeps keeping itself healthy, or if you get things out of balance, that it's difficult to right the ship again because your bacteria are out of balance now, and so you don't have as good of an immune system function because the beneficial bacteria aren't in there helping the immune system to know what to do. They're also not in there, directly mitigating the effects of toxins and other, invading microbes, and then they're also not healing the enterocytes, in terms of what I was saying about directly reducing the cancerousness of those cells. And then also, they're not there providing energy, so your enterocytes or your own gut cells are actually starving and depleted of energy to do their job. Okay. You're welcome, Georgina. Okay, so this, when you look at this picture here, or when I look at this picture here, this actually could have been taken in my backyard pretty much, but I love the Northwest. But why I put this up here is another, sort of like the grass on the hill, but I think the grass is a good example for what I use it for, but actually not quite a great example because for a really healthy ecosystem, you need the diversity. So like that hill with the grass on it, if humans disappeared from the planet for 100 years and then you came back, that grass hill would likely not be just a grass hill. It might not look like this depending on where it is, but if it was the right environment or the right weather, right, the right amount of rain and the right amount of temperature and all that, this is what it would start to look like. And that's because one of the things you notice in here is a diversity, right? We see ferns, we see other ground cover bushes, here in the front. We see moss, which are probably quite a few varieties of mosses. We see the trees, and a variety of different types of trees growing, big ones, little ones, old ones, dead ones, live ones, ones in various states of decay. And then the floor is covered with broken down leaves and sticks and all kinds of stuff that are starting to break down and will eventually become the soil. And so to have a healthy whole system, a whole forest that's healthy, it requires healthy soil that has enough organic matter in it from the breakdown of all the other stuff, but also a diversity of plants, because some plants use certain nutrients in the soil and give other nutrients back that then feed other plants. And there's all this symbiotic relationship that happens with funguses and the mosses and all these things. So I think a forest like this is a really good example of, or an analogy, or a fractal reality, if you will, of what's going on inside our body. And I really wanted to hammer home the point about the diversity, because that's the more we research, and the new, like the cutting edge new research stuff is telling us that one of the biggest factors in our gut health is really having diversity. All right, so we talked about the microbiome, the microbiota, and some of the things related to dysbiosis, or when we have good bacterial balance, and then those opposite of all those things happen, we have bad bacterial balance. So this is looking at what's known as leaky gut, which really goes part and parcel, or hand in hand with dysbiosis. It kind of can't happen one without the other. But when we talk about leaky gut, we're talking about increased intestinal permeability. So we're talking specifically about what's going on at the cells of our digestive system itself. So this picture, what you're looking at is these kind of funny looking rectangular things with the little fingers at the top. Those are the enterocytes, or those are the cells that line the inside of our digestive system. So the top of this picture is like the inside of our intestines, and then we're looking at small intestines here. So food and all that stuff would be over here getting digested. And then you have the cells, and then right on the other side we have the bloodstream. So on the left, you see how it says normal tight junction. And so that's normal healthy enterocytes, and then here you see leaky and inflamed. These red arrows going through showing these things up here that normally wouldn't be able to fit through those little spaces, now we're able to get directly into the bloodstream. So the way that works is, and not to be too repetitive, but when everything's healthy, when those cells are healthy, which now we've heard has a huge relationship with how healthy the microbiome is, but when our cells are healthy, we have this normal tight junctions between the cells that are healthy. And those tight junctions do a whole lot of things. But what we're referring to here is what they do physically, meaning that only literally, like physically, only small enough stuff can make it through those tight junctions. And those tight junctions, the spaces between the cells, is where the stuff goes in there. And with the little fingers too, they absorb really tiny stuff. So when it's all in good order, we eat food and it gets digested and broken down. And once it's broken down into small enough parts, then it can be absorbed into the bloodstream, and then our bloodstream carries it around to all the right places so we can build new cells out of it, get energy, all the good stuff we do with our food. And I mean the nutrients that come from our food, vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and amino acids and all that stuff. But when we have dysbiosis, when we have toxic assault, and when we have inflammation or an inflammatory process in our digestive system, that all of those things degrade and attack our normal tight junctions. These are little proteins that hold the cells together. And we start to get these spaces or these leaks in our enteric system. And so what ends up happening is stuff makes it directly into our bloodstream that shouldn't be there. And when enough of that stuff gets in our bloodstream that shouldn't be there, it triggers an immune response. So we can see here, it talks about autoimmunity. Autoimmunity. So how that happens, well, let's start with inflammation. So when these things that get into our bloodstream do that shouldn't be there, it's irritating to our cells. They're too big, they're the wrong shape. They have chemicals that are not supposed to be getting in there. A lot of that metabolome, if you remember that, those are the chemicals that the microbiome releases in its normal metabolic process. Some of that gets into our bloodstream, or a lot of that gets into our bloodstream, and we're not used to it. It's inflammatory, it's irritating, and causes inflammation systemically. So that's one problem. Another problem with leaky gut is this autoimmunity. So the way that works in a simplified sense, because there are some complexities to it, but one of the ways you can look at it is when you eat food that you become sensitive to. So, we've heard about like food sensitivities. That's kind of like a big thing, kids with food allergies, all that stuff. So in this case, if our person here that we're looking at their intestines ate a lot of, tomatoes, for example, and now they have this leaky and inflamed gut, and so every time they eat these tomatoes, some of the proteins in the tomato leak into the bloodstream before they're broken down enough. So they're polypeptides and things like that, but they're not what is supposed to be in there. And so what ends up happening is once enough of them are floating around frequently enough, the immune system identifies them and says, these things aren't supposed to be here. This is an antigen, and starts to mount an immune response. And so what it does as part of that immune response is create antibodies for these tomato proteins. And that's a problem because those same proteins in our food, those amino acids and polypeptides in our food, are the same ones that we actually make our body out of, the structure of our body. They're similar. They're very similar. And so often what can happen is that this immune response, these antibodies, will get a little confused, two things happen. One is they can either get confused, or the other thing is they mount a big response, and then you're not eating tomatoes all day long every day. So there's all these antibodies floating around for this response that then goes away, when you're not eating the tomatoes. And so the antibodies need something to do. They're like little really aggressive army guys, right? And so they want to do their job. So it just sort of depends on what those proteins look like in your body. So sometimes say in the example of the tomato, the antibodies that get made improperly recognize, say, like your thyroid gland tissue, some of the tissue in your thyroid gland, as the foreign antigen, and starts attacking it, or certain tissues in your joints and starts attacking that, or tissues in your nervous system in your brain and start attacking that. They can happen everywhere and anywhere based on whatever they're finding, whatever whatever the immune system is thinking is going on, whatever foods are coming through. And so we get what are called food sensitivities, and which can often lead to a lot of autoimmunity. So this is how, I don't know if any of you have run into or heard, anybody talking about leaky gut and so forth, or I've definitely heard from a lot of parents bringing that up with their pediatricians and doctors, as far as my kid has ADHD, my kid has Asperger's, my kid's on the autism spectrum, my kid has eczema, my kid has allergies, whatever the case may be, and have suggested, do you think it could be like a leaky gut problem? And I've heard countless stories from parents where the doctor, looks at them like they're crazy. Like either, leaky gut doesn't exist, or, why are you talking about a gut problem when you're like this? They don't have stomach ache, they have eczema, or they don't have a stomach ache, they have ADHD. And so, part of my goal here is to make it understandable and to have you understand also sort of the implications of this, and how, hopefully, understand how a problem with your digestive system, with your gut, can cause problems anywhere in your body, because it's all connected. All right, let's see. I got a question over here. What are symptoms of blood-brain barrier breach? Yeah, over there on the left, blood-brain barrier. So a couple things happen with that. One is that inflammation and the autoimmunity can happen and attack our nervous system and cause inflammation in our brain. But those same proteins that cause that normal tight junction you see in these enterocytes there that hold the cells together, those are the same ones. We have tight junctions in cell-to-cell structures all over our body. So our blood-brain barrier looks a lot like the intestinal mucosal cells. which looks a lot like the cells in our bladder, which look a lot like the cells, actually, that some of the cellular structure that lines our vascular system, arterial system, they're everywhere. And so those chemicals and those toxins that first break down our gut lining and make leaky gut, now when they can get through, they get into our bloodstream and disperse everywhere, and so can actually start causing for leaky brain, essentially. And once you have leaky brain, you can have any number of neuroinflammatory symptoms, So let's see, what are the most common ones? Things like fuzzy thinking, mild disorientation, like, you walk into a room and you're like, why did I go in this room? Brain fog is a big one. You can even have balance issues. These are all sort of the early signs, the not major signs like, major dementia and stuff like that. But also a lot of the symptoms we see with ADHD. So hyperactivity, inattention, difficulty shifting from one activity to another. These are all things that are symptomatic of brain inflammation. Is there a blood test you can do to see if the blood-brain barrier has been breached? Not directly that I'm aware of. In terms of a blood test, you can test for inflammation markers, but that doesn't necessarily tell you specifically why there's inflammation. So not specifically, but keep that in mind. Keep your question in mind and those considerations in mind as we go along in these 7 days, because we're also going to dive into how do you know if you have this going on, because there isn't just you can't just draw some blood or take a stool sample and know. So we'll talk about some of the tests that give us a sort of a glimpse into what's going on there, but really how some of the other ways you can really identify if this is or might be part of the problem. Hope that answers the question as best that I can at this moment. All right, so then like we were talking about the microbiome, you can see how or we can talk about how there's sort of like either a downward spiral or an upward spiral. So in this case, we're talking about leaky gut. And so we'll start right here at the top, intestinal inflammation of gut lining. So all of the processes that cause for the leaky gut also cause inflammation. So dysbiosis causes for inflammation. Toxins in our system, an overload of toxins in our system cause inflammation. Exposure to chemicals that cause leaky gut cause inflammation also. Our gut cells not being healthy because they don't have the right microbiome giving them nutrients, that causes inflammation. So intestinal inflammation is a good place to start. So intestinal inflammation of the gut lining, and we didn't talk about this specifically yet, but you can sort of imagine if when we talked about the microbiome and how it has a big part to play in breaking down our food and creating certain nutrients and vitamins and minerals. We also see that directly when we have leaky gut, we have nutrient malabsorption. So our gut isn't working right. And so we start not being able, like we're absorbing or getting the wrong things into our bloodstream. But because we're not breaking down those foods enough, and also now we have dysbiosis, so the bacteria aren't doing their job correctly, we start to have functional malnutrition or nutrient malabsorption. And I'll tell you a common thing we see in people with leaky gut is mild anemia, because iron doesn't get prepared appropriately and then absorbed appropriately. So you can be taking iron supplements, but if you have leaky gut and dysbiosis, you still will be anemic often. And magnesium's another big one. And vitamin B12, it says there too. Yeah, that's a big one too. Because it actually turns out that a lot of the vitamin B12 that we get into our bloodstream comes directly from bacteria making it for us, not just from eating red meat. Okay, so then we see we have that immune response like we were talking about with autoimmunity, or just the immune system gets fired up, we get inflammation all over the body. This causes GI issues, most commonly, though not necessarily. Certainly a lot of people have leaky gut without specific gastrointestinal issues. But multiple food intolerances, whether you know it or not, whether you know you have them or not, or your kid has them or not, are very common with leaky gut once we get to that immune response. And then full-blown autoimmune disease. And then autoimmune disease causes inflammation, often of the intestinal lining. And we go round and round the circle we go until we take the steps we need to correct the problem and the balance. Okay, so I think those are the questions. So that was what I wanted to cover today in terms of the dysbiosis and leaky gut in particular. Hopefully I didn't just, sometimes I worry that, like there's this popular picture on the internet of like a little kid standing in front of a fire hydrant, and the fire hydrant, like the thing came off and was blasting the kid in the face. Like they're trying to get a drink, but they're getting a whole fire hydrant blasted at them. Hopefully that's not how you feel right now. But there was a lot to cover. So what I would like to say about that is that, that is me. Yeah, there you go. All right. So this will be up for 24 hours. Like I said, the last one, watch it again if you need to. And as you're thinking about it, if you watch it again, whatever, post questions in the comments, and I'll keep my eye on those and answer those to the best of my ability. Of course, like your teacher in grade school told you, no question is dumb. And if you have a question, that likely means that 20 other people watching it have that same question. So, be brave, be the one to ask the question, and I'll do my best to answer it to the best of my ability. Also, as we're going along, if things aren't connecting, from one lesson to the next, or you have a lingering question that maybe isn't even specifically about that lesson, like even if you have a question from last time, you can post it there too, and I'll be happy to answer that. And if we find a lot of similar questions, then I'll even do like some trainings on whatever you guys have. So bottom line, make comments, questions in the comments about this stuff, and I'll try to do my best to make it make sense for you. So next time, tomorrow, we're going to be talking about where your biome comes from. So like, each of us has some, a microbiota in there, right? Each of us has a different variety of bacteria and funguses and viruses and all that stuff in there. And where does that come from? How do we get those unique things? There are a lot of different factors in that. And then we'll dive into the causes of leaky gut and dysbiosis. So today we talked about what that is. With the biome, we talked about what the normal and all that a little bit, and the leaky gut, like what that actually means. And so we'll talk about where the biome comes from, and then what are the causes, the most common causes of leaky gut and dysbiosis. Let's see, always anemic, low B12 and D, right? Yeah, that's classic for leaky gut and dysbiosis. Low iron, low B12. I don't know if you've been tested for magnesium, Lucy, but my guess would be you'd be low in that, and vitamin D. Also because, I know that you live in the Pacific Northwest, so a lot of us are low in vitamin D in the Pacific Northwest as it is, but we do require the right microbiome to synthesize vitamin D and, have our body have the right amount. So, yeah, those are some clues to what might be going on for you. All right, everybody, I'm going to sign off now from this, our live. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so I kind of went fast today. I know that. We had a lot to cover. And, I'm going to look back over it too and see if I want to dive a little bit more deep, or a little bit more, give more explanation on any of those topics if I didn't, touch on them well. But that's why also I'm saying to leave some comments below or questions, so I know if you're getting it, and I know what to spend more time illustrating. All right, you guys take care, and we'll see you tomorrow.